Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's IT Pro Today webcast, a dynamic cloud duo, how Citrix plus Google Cloud is revolutionizing how we work, sponsored by Citrix and Google Cloud. Let's meet today's speakers. Bill Clayman, contributing editor at IT Pro Today, Jeff Allen, solutions architect at Google Cloud, and Rick Dellinger, principal solutions architect, strategic alliances at Citrix. And with that, the floor is all yours, Bill, Rick, and Jeff.
Thank you so much, Magali, and I'm genuinely excited to be here. So we're talking about a couple of really cool technologies, Google Cloud and Citrix, both of which I've had a chance to work with over the past years, and I'm so excited to have Jeff and Rick here to discuss the entire stack of what we're working with today and how, and I don't use this word lightly, this dynamic cloud duo is genuinely revolutionizing how we work. And revolutionizing how we work is no longer this gimmicky marketing-y word. It's different, friends. It really is different today. For me, for a lot of people listening, I mean, you might be sitting in your pajamas, and if you're not, and you're in the office, thank you for keeping those wheels turning. Let me kind of set the lay of the land here, make sure everyone is on the same page. More people today are working from home than ever before, and more organizations rely on cloud computing to support truly critical operations. And in a world where speed and performance have become even more critical, application and cloud leaders, they need to rethink how users, you guys, are consuming content and how you stay productive. But here's the thing, how do you do this while ensuring security? And I'm not just talking about traditional security, I'm talking about security redefined in today's era. And what about ensuring things like high performance from complex and rich applications? And how do you give users freedom in this environment of revolutionizing how we work to use devices that increase productivity without restricting their ability to innovate? And that's what we're going to be talking about here in this webinar, how Citrix and Google Cloud are working together to change connectivity and deliver superior applications, desktop resources, and experiences. This is our agenda, and I love an interactive conversation. I know based on our previous chats, Rick and Jeff do as well. So please, this is your chance to ask people who have had a chance to work with these technologies across the board, any question, comment, concern that you might have, how these technologies work together, maybe how they impact your specific use case. And if we don't get to your question right now, please don't be sad. We will send those off to Jeff and Rick, and they will be able to answer them offline. If you take a look at our world today, you know very quickly, and you'll see very quickly, that we're operating in a digital world. And if you take a look at sort of the industries, and obviously people know what's going on in the news, but like we're connecting, but it's different, right? There's a few things that are changing out there in the world where people are consuming content. They're using connectivity as a really powerful tool, and there are some really impactful trends because of the pandemic, because of the lockdown, and what people are actually doing online. And again, we are connecting, but it's different. Now, I'm sorry if it's a little bit blurry, but you know what? People are cooking more. People are exercising more, so hopefully you're doing that. There's more distance learning. There's more career planning. These are online behaviors that we're doing in our free time to make sure that we do stay connected and that we are trying to improve ourselves. But let's pause here for a second. Let's take a look at your workplace. Remember that through this digital world, this operating in a digital economy, our workplace is changing as well, right? It could be in healthcare, pharmaceutical, manufacturing, financial services. And if you take a look at even deeper, what does your workplace look right now? I mean, this might be you smiling away wearing pajamas in the bottom and listening to this webinar, which is totally fine. And if you look like this, good. I'm glad you're at least 50% comfortable. But this is the new workplace. So the question becomes, how do we deliver powerful resources located on-premise and in the cloud through things like Google Cloud to you, sitting there, continue to consume this content and make sure that it's continued to be productive and it's also effective and secure for you to access this kind of architecture. What we quickly learned when we entered in the world of lockdowns and pandemics and working from home is that the state of connectivity is pretty chaotic. And this is something that I saw in the data center space, in the cloud connectivity space. A lot of it's incomplete, right? Different points of solutions from many vendors. The challenge that you're trying to connect them together, but they don't always work together. They're complex, repeated point-to-point operations. This one's the killer one. The manual operations part of it. The companies that are leading in digital transformation and working with apps, desktops, and cloud connectivity are the ones that are trying to remove these single-click operations that are manual and very reactive too often. The other challenge is they're not compliant. It's very difficult to enforce consistent sets of policies, and it's difficult to measure compliance with those sets of policies when you have incomplete or complex solutions. And this is where we get into the conversation of working with Google Cloud and Citrix, how they're revolutionizing the way we work, learn, interact, and certainly connect. Now, over the years, I've had a chance to work with both of these solutions from a DevOps perspective, from a design and development perspective. I've worked with one of the largest Google Cloud partners in helping them refactor applications. I had a chance to work with one of the biggest Citrix partners as well in terms of how they deliver different kinds of applications and desktops. And today we see how these two technologies are actually working together. Now, for some of you folks, you might not necessarily know that GCP, Google Cloud, is a really extensive platform. Over the course of 20 years, Google built the most powerful cloud infrastructure in the world, and Google Cloud Platform is actually a set of modular cloud-based services that allow you to create anything from simple websites to complex applications. Then we turn to Citrix, right? Founded more than 30 years ago, provides this industry-leading service in applications and desktops and virtualization, networking solutions, software as a service, and today, more than 400,000 clients worldwide, including 99% of Fortune 100 companies, use Citrix to stay connected and certainly stay productive. So all together, we're saying hello to Citrix and Google Cloud. We're going to be very excited here to learn how these two together and what the actual stack looks like. I'm really excited to be joined by our amazing speakers, Rick Dellinger and a good friend of mine, Principal Solutions Architect from Citrix, and Jeff Allen, Solutions Architect from Google Cloud. We've had several conversations. We've had a chance to geek out a little bit, and I've had a chance to ask them some questions. And this is a really fascinating solution in terms of all the stuff that it can do and the kinds of challenges it can solve and the kinds of revolutionary things that it can bring to people sitting at home, working remotely, or consuming content in a distributed fashion. So I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm hoping that Rick and Jeff are just as excited as I am to be here today because we're going to jump right in. There's some questions that are out there in the industry in terms of helping people understand where Citrix is and what Google Cloud is doing. Now, personally, I know that we've come a far way. I've had a chance to work with both of these technologies quite a bit, and it's really a pleasure to be chatting with two leaders when it comes to the cloud. Now, interestingly, like I said, I've had a chance to work with these technologies, both of them together over the years, but what some folks don't know is that your two organizations, Google Cloud and Citrix, have built quite a partnership and quite a relationship. I'm really curious, and maybe Rick, you can touch on this first. Can you discuss some of the collaboration that you've done over the past years or several years and what the partnership looks like today from a technology perspective?
I sure can, Bill, although I tell you, I think anybody would have a challenge matching your enthusiasm, but I'll do my best. Yeah, so the Citrix and Google relationship actually goes back quite a ways. We're talking somewhere around 2010 when we first actually engaged, and we actually worked really closely with Google on the introduction of a Chrome operating system and Chromebooks. And that was really just the start. And if you see over the years, we did quite a few different integration points leading up into about 2017 when we actually first announced support for our virtualization technology running on top of Google Cloud. So a couple things that I'd like to call out from the slide that we've got up on the screen right now. One is just the age, right? We're working on our 10th or 11th year now of this collaboration. But the other thing I'll point out is the amplitude. So the investments have been ramping up substantially, especially over the last 3 years. And we've now got solutions that cross the entire space, from endpoint management to software-defined networking and wide area networking technology to our virtualization technology, and even integration of the G Suite application set inside of Citrix Workspace. So lots of exciting stuff we've already built and lots of exciting stuff coming still.
Very cool. Jeff, anything to add?
Well, Rick, that was a great overview, and I second those thoughts. When I first started supporting the Citrix Google relationship several years ago, I was impressed with how mature it already was. When we'd go to the conferences and meet all of the customers that had already invested in the Chromebook Citrix ecosystem, that were using Google tools for their endpoint devices and using G Suite for their collaboration tools. And it's been really exciting over these past years to work to extend that partnership to bring Citrix features into Google Cloud and continue to innovate how we work together to make a Google Cloud Platform the best platform to run Citrix in the cloud.
Mm-hmm. I don't want to date myself too much. I'm looking at this chart right now. If I go back around 6 to 7 years, I remember when I first cut my teeth on a Google Chromebook and Citrix deployment for a very large global manufacturer, and it was so much fun being able to deliver these Google Cloud resources intermixed with a Citrix ecosystem and environment and really create a powerful experience for the users. Which really kind of brings me to the next question, this anywhere culture that we're experiencing very much so right now. Everything that you guys are talking about, this relationship that's maturing, these technologies that are being integrated together is really exciting, and I genuinely mean that. The power of GCP, Google Cloud Platform, and the flexibility of this anywhere architecture with Citrix is really something people need to be paying attention to. I know a lot of times people talk about roadmap and in the future, but I'm really curious, what can people deploy today? And really most of all, what does the Citrix and Google Cloud solution stack look like right now? Jeff, maybe you can answer that one first.
Sure. Absolutely. Thanks, Bill. So we've got this slide which kind of shows the ecosystem that I described in the previous discussion, where this goes all the way from the left hand of this diagram, where we're talking about the endpoint devices. That could be Chrome, that could be Android. Citrix has clients that run in the browser and native clients, and Chromebooks and Android devices are very popular in the Citrix world as the choice of your endpoint device. So that's kind of where the stack starts. That's like the foundation of it. Once you're logged into Citrix and you're accessing the Citrix Workspace, or through your Chrome browser, a lot of folks will access G Suite as their productivity suite. So this would be for their documents and presentations and file sharing and calendar, and Google Meet for the video conferencing that's become so important in these days where we're working from home so much more. And all of these tools, again, can be accessed on those endpoint devices that are supported by Google and by Citrix. And then we've got the Citrix Cloud, which includes the workspaces as sort of a workspace as a landing page where you can launch your various SaaS applications like G Suite, where you can click through into your virtual desktops and virtual apps. We've got layered security and policy-based enforcement and all kinds of interesting features that the administrators can configure in Citrix Cloud to make sure that people are safe and secure while they're working from home and using these tools. And then on the right-hand side, we have the Google Cloud Platform. And this is becoming a popular target for deploying your fleet of virtual machines that power those virtual desktop and app environments. So in GCP, we have infrastructure services that allow you to easily configure appropriately sized virtual machines and launch as many as you need to run those sessions for your users. And we've got the virtual applications that Citrix has provided to the Google Marketplace. If you want to, run load balancing appliances and further configure, an advanced Citrix architecture in GCP, those tools are available to you as well. So when we think kind of end to end, all the way from the endpoint device through the virtual workspace, through the productivity apps, all the way to the infrastructure in the cloud, you can kind of see all the different integration points that this partnership between Google and Citrix supports.
Very cool. And then Rick, curious to hear you add some perspective here.
Yeah, as you see, the partnership with Google, we think is extremely important because Google does represent such a broad ecosystem, right? They're not just a cloud provider. They've also got some of the best endpoint devices in the world. They've got a fantastic and insanely productive Office suite, if you will, with the G Suite of applications and services. Plus, obviously, GCP as an insanely powerful IaaS platform and also application delivery platform, right? Tons of different services there. So it's all comes together with cloud services to provide great options for customers to be able to access the different types of resources and such that they need to get their job done. So that our solution areas that we've collaborated on, we've brought to market together, really span three kind of broad structured areas. We've mentioned the G Suite integration, or what you might call the productivity and workspace area. So with G Suite, we've got the Workspace app, runs obviously on Chrome devices, Android devices, and whatever other device types a customer or user might bring to the table. The Workspace app provides single sign-on and secured access to the G Suite apps, as well as other apps that might be leveraging Google-based authentication. We've got on the far side then, the endpoint device support and our integration between Citrix Endpoint Management and both Chrome Enterprise and Android Enterprise for the device management. And then, of course, the core stuff that you've got right there in the middle, that's really about the infrastructure and the tools and components necessary to deliver applications and services to your users. So that's where the intersection of our historic app and desktop virtualization technology comes together, obviously running very well on top of Google Platform today and getting better by the day. Also of our networking technology. So our Citrix ADC and Citrix Gateway appliances, as well as our Citrix SD-WAN advanced networking appliances run on top of GCP. And of course, the Workspace app is really kind of the central point of consumption for a Citrix type of a solution. And with the Workspace app, we're really trying to bring all the different types of apps and services together and data together for the user inside of one space, providing contextual and secured access, providing real deep and advanced analytics on the back end to help you run the environment. So we really have worked collaboratively across all these different areas to try and provide a holistic solution for customers that are leveraging any number or interested in any number of those different areas.
Mm-hmm. I think you guys mentioned something interesting, and Rick, you did too, that security, the contextual security, in working with some of the solutions, right, there's a lot around user management, who, what, where, when, how, and why something accessing, being able to geofence entire area. So there's a lot of security that's built into this, which kind of brings me to the next question. As far as like a shared responsibility, this is kind of where it gets exciting. So folks, as you're listening to this, we're gonna pop the hood a little bit here on the Google Cloud and the Citrix design. So I'm really curious about this, right? We know it's a shared responsibility model, so we want to ensure that these two solutions work well together. So when working with cloud, you have to share responsibility. So let's talk about some design patterns, best practices, and a couple of maybe real-world stories that you can talk about. So first, I'm really curious about asking you if you could break down some designs that you've seen that are successful with Citrix on GCP. And then I'm really curious to learn about the networking design. Rick, you just mentioned that, as well as high availability. And finally, can you discuss on how you optimize the cost of running all of these kinds of solutions? definitely really curious to hear about, us popping the hood and looking to see how this stuff actually runs. So maybe Rick, you can start us off here.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So we kind of break down the design patterns that we commonly see tend to fall into three primary different patterns. The first pattern for a solution, we're calling the cloud forward design pattern. And this is really for organizations that are building new from the ground up, not trying to integrate a whole bunch of legacy technology, or they're organizations who are really all in on the cloud. They're going after operationalization, and they're looking to get out of the business of managing their own infrastructure. So this design pattern leverages cloud services for all the different components of the solution, and also optionally connects the customer's existing resources, such as Active Directory and on-prem based applications and resources, up into Google Cloud, leveraging a back-end, either Google Cloud Interconnect or VPN, or a purpose-built appliance like Citrix SD-WAN to connect the two networks together. But this solution, what it looks like really is, if you look off to the right, you have kind of the footprint that ends up being reproduced if you're doing a deployment across multiple different regions inside of GCP. That's a construct that we call a Citrix Cloud resource location. So if you imagine that as a bubble, a secured bubble of a private VPC network construct in GCP, inside of that environment, you've got core resources and services necessary, such as Active Directory. And to that, we add the Citrix Cloud Connectors. Now, Cloud Connectors you could think of as kind of like secure proxies to the Citrix Cloud. That's how Citrix Cloud connects to and communicates to your private infrastructure, and how your infrastructure also communicates to Citrix Cloud. So you've got highly available components. So we duplicate resources such as your AD domain controllers and your cloud connectors. We split those across zones, so you've got resiliency in the case of a zonal outage of some sort. And then to that, we add the Citrix VDAs. VDA is simply a virtual machine instance running an operating system, typically Windows Server. Also, we see Windows. We do support and see Linux as a workload for VDAs as well. But the VDAs are really the workers of the environment. That's where your applications are installed and configured. And behind those VDAs, you typically deploy in the resource location the different components you need to support the range of applications you're delivering. So that could be like file servers, file server for home directories and user profiles and such. That's in just about every environment. But if your apps also have things that communicate to, say, back-end database instances or application servers, those also end up being deployed into Citrix Cloud resource location on GCP. So all the different layers of the stack are serviced by Citrix Cloud-based services. So the virtual app and desktop service being kind of the primary one that does all the brokering and administration for the environment. So it's responsible for connecting users to the specific VDA to deliver their workload. The Citrix Gateway service, which is an out-of-the-box, already configured mechanism for securely proxying HDX connections into those VDAs. And HDX, for those that may be new to this, HDX is Citrix's industry-leading remote display protocol stack. So we leverage the gateway service for the HDX session proxy. We leverage the Citrix Workspace service for user interface and authentication. And so the Workspace app connects to the service. The user authenticates to that service, and then we present them with all the apps and data and resources that they have access to. And then finally, it also leverages the Citrix Analytics service. And that's where we're taking advantage of things like machine learning in order to provide a much greater level of depth and understanding and allow the administrators to do some proactive, what's the word I'm looking for here? Proactively respond to changing elements in the environment and also things like user threats. So all these pieces come together with the endpoint devices running the Citrix Workspace app. The Workspace app can be run by HTML. So you just simply need a browser, and Chrome browser being the top and most commonly leveraged browser for that. Or if you're looking for more rich, more capable functionality, then you run the Citrix Workspace app. But basically, that's how the solution comes together. It's available right out of the box. You don't need to own anything in order to build this type of a solution. You go stand this up in 30 minutes or less. I think we may touch a little bit later on some of the tooling that we've got to help you build these kinds of things. But all you need is a billable Google Cloud project and a subscription to the Citrix Virtual App and Desktop service. You got those two components. Inside of 30 minutes, you can have a fully functioning solution, have users connecting into and run virtualized apps inside of your own private data center.
Very cool. Thank you, Rick. You definitely helped us understand a little bit more about how these two work together. Jeff, I'd love for you to add some context here from your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Bill. One of the questions that you asked was, how can you optimize a network and how can you optimize for high availability? And if we take a look at this next reference architecture, it's very similar in some ways to what Rick just walked us through. I mean, if you notice, we still have the Citrix Cloud, we still have the endpoint devices, we have our on-premises environment in the lower left, and we have Google Cloud Platform over on the right-hand side. And on the right-hand side, we still have the VDA fleet hosting our virtual desktops and our virtual apps, and we still have our cloud connectors providing that bridge into Citrix Cloud, and we still have our domain controllers. But in the lower right, there's a little bit different configuration here. In the lower right, we have introduced Citrix ADC gateway appliances, right? And these are our virtual machines running Citrix software, again, available for installation through the Google Marketplace. But this provides you a direct entry point into your Google Cloud environment. Rick mentioned that Citrix Cloud has gateway services that run as a managed service, which provide you a similar entry point into Citrix Cloud and ultimately into the virtual apps and desktops hosted in your Google Cloud Platform environment. But if you want to take more control over the way those gateway services are configured, perhaps you have some special requirements around the HA configuration, and you want to make sure that you have gateways configured in certain zones or in certain regions within Google Cloud. Or perhaps you're interested in having that direct network pathway between the end users and their devices and the gateway. Then by deploying these gateways, you can configure the cluster of gateways as you choose. You can optimize that network path and provide in some ways a more performant environment if you want to start tuning that environment for your end users experience. And similarly, you notice that we've got Storefront here. Now, Storefront is similar to Citrix Workspace. but I believe Citrix, when you have sort of extreme uptime requirements, it's still Citrix recommendation that you do an HA configuration of Citrix storefront in your Google Cloud environment. And so that's what we've got depicted here, where you'll have a similar experience of that landing page when the user logs in, from which they can choose their virtual apps and desktops. But instead of being served up through Workspace in Citrix Cloud, in this configuration, the storefront is being served up by this HA configuration of storefront servers that are configured to run in GCP. So it's interesting to see that you can do a very easy deployment, like what Rick walked through, where you're using the default configurations, you're using all of the managed services that Citrix Cloud provides for you. And then as necessary, where you need a more advanced configuration or you want to tune something specifically for your needs, there's this kind of a piecemeal approach by which you can move aspects of the architecture from Citrix Cloud into your own self-managed Google Cloud environment and take full control of all the features that the Citrix tools offer you. So it's a very flexible, I would say, and customizable solution where you can tune the specific pieces of the architecture as necessary to meet your needs.
Jeff, you touched on something really important. Rick, can you actually talk about that movement, that migration a little bit?
Yeah, I definitely can. Citrix technologies, virtualization technologies have been around for a long time. I don't know that I want to necessarily date myself in the midst of this call, but we've been leveraging Citrix virtualization tech. It's been evolving for 3 decades now. And so the flexibility that the solutions provide, excuse me, in some cases, people might consider our flexibility as complexity. But that flexibility and maturity and the ability to introduce some of our customer managed components, like an ADC gateway instance or pair of instances running on GCP, or add storefront into the mix, that really provides a ton of flexibility that allows you to tailor the solution stack to meet a broad variety of different needs. So as Jeff mentioned, this hybrid pattern is one that matches really well for customers who have some really, really high availability requirements, or they need some additional flexibility in how they route or how they tune their HDX session proxy services. But we see a lot of customers that have been investing in Citrix technologies and getting some great value out of Citrix technologies for a number of years. And a lot of those customers are now coming to us and saying, hey, we're seeing this cloud thing. We're seeing the other organizations getting massive cost and availability and performance types of benefits out of the move to the cloud. And we want to get out of the data center business. We want to start moving some of those resources to the cloud as well. So in that kind of a model, we've got a migration pattern that you could leverage. And basically what happens with the migration pattern, you don't want to dig into all the little points and arrows that we've got inside of this diagram, is you stand up a new quote-unquote farm or a new environment running up on GCP, leveraging Citrix Cloud services. And then you aggregate an existing environment. So what's depicted on the bottom left-hand corner there would be an existing investment that the customer might have with storefront and delivery controllers and BDAs and ADC gateways, all those kinds of resources. So with this migration pattern, you stand up this new resource location, and the pattern for that looks identical to the cloud forward design pattern that we showed you earlier. And then you leverage the UI technologies that we've got. And both of the both of the technologies that we've got to provide UI, meaning being the Citrix Workspace service and also Citrix Storefront, have the ability to aggregate resources from multiple different farms and present those to users in one UI with one login and single sign-on to all those different resources. So what we see customers doing is standing up the new environment, if you will, up in GCP, connecting it from the user's perspective to the UI, either with Storefront and or with Citrix Workspace UI, deploying immediately typically a new workload up on GCP, and then as the business requirements change and evolve, the customer can then migrate individual workloads or collections of VDAs alongside those applications out of their customer managed data centers and up into GCP, kind of on their own time schedule. And we find that this pattern is an attractive one for enterprises that have knowledge already. They've already spent a lot of time and energy in learning how to build and run and operationalize Citrix technologies such as ABC Gateway and Storefront. It makes it a really easy way for them to get into the cloud and start taking advantage of all the fantastic benefits that you get out of Google Cloud Platform, and then migrate to workloads to Google Cloud on their own time scale, and also then evolve their internal skill sets around the new capabilities that things like the Virtual App and Desktop service and the Citrix Workspace service provide. So it makes for a way for customers, existing customers, to get up and running very, very quickly on Google Cloud Platform, and then migrate things over to GCP over time.
Perfect, and that was the best softball, Rick, that you could ever give me for the next question that I've got. What's been fascinating about these past few slides is that I absolutely see just how much more seamless it is to integrate both technologies together and deploy, way easier than it was, 6, 7, 8 years ago. So if we take a look, diving in a little bit deeper as far as what's possible and how is it even easy to deploy this. Over the years in working with Google and GCP, I've had a chance to, like I said, refactor applications, leverage really cool cognitive systems, and even, like I said, I had a chance to work with Citrix on GCP. But since my architecture days are a few years back, like you've mentioned, a lot has changed, and it's so much easier to deploy these technologies. I want to discuss deploying into GCP a little bit and actually how it works and what people can do to get started. So Rick, maybe you can kick this part off for us.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So kind of the foundation step that we guide folks towards, and the design pattern that we would have them take a look at, would be the cloud forward design pattern that we mentioned initially. And again, a key here is that it's super simple to stand up. You can have it up and running inside of 30 minutes, leveraging some automation technologies that we've got out there. But it's a fully functioning solution stack right out of the box. And so that is really the creation of that resource location object up on GCP. And I'd already touched on earlier the prereqs that you need to get started here. And that's simply a buildable GCP project. And it could even be one of the evaluation project types, and a subscription to the Citrix Virtual App and Desktop service. But then basically all you're doing is then putting the types of resources that you need up into that resource location. That includes Active Directory, installing and building those cloud connectors, providing some mechanism for internet egress, such as the Google Cloud CloudNet service. You deploy some VDAs up into that resource location, and then you simply need to have some supporting infrastructure for whatever set of apps that you've got out there. But that combination is, like I said, it's easy to get into. It's complete right out of the box. You walk away with it right immediately with a fully functioning solution. And it gives you a great way to sample all the best new capabilities that you get from Google Cloud and Citrix Cloud Services.
Very cool. And Jeff, if you've had any other perspectives on how these two work together, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, well, thanks, Bill. Rick covered it well, and I like to describe the Citrix on GCP deployment as a simple three-step process, really. Where step one involves your private networking in your Active Directory. That may already be in place at your organization, or that may be something that you put in place as part of your Citrix on GCP project. But once you've got that Active Directory, and this could be, we've got several ways to extend Active Directory into Google Cloud Platform. Some people do reach back to their on-prem Active Directory, but for performance reasons, many people like to extend domain controllers into the cloud. You can run those domain controllers on virtual machines, or we have a managed service for Active Directory where we take care of all of the VMs and the domain controllers for you as part of a managed service, and then you can just access that domain as a privileged user and configure it and join your VMs to that domain. But whichever way you go with Active Directory and your private networking, that's kind of step one for getting Citrix into GCP. Then the next step is simply to deploy your cloud connectors. This is typically a pair of virtual machines in different zones within the region that you want to use, that you stand up and then you install the Citrix Cloud Connector software on them. And that will prompt you to log in and choose a resource location in Citrix Cloud where you want to connect. This region in Google Cloud gets connected with a resource location in Citrix Cloud. And then once that's in place, you pretty much then just need to deploy your fleet of VDAs. And, so you might choose to use Machine Creation Services or MCS to do that, in which case you would launch a virtual machine and prep it, install all the software that you want to be available to users, install the VDA software, and then use MCS to clone that and deploy a whole fleet of VMs that are configured exactly the same way, and allow the virtual desktop and app hosting to happen. So it's really a simple three-step process like that: Active Directory, Cloud Connectors, and then fleet deployment with MCS. Also, Rick alluded to a couple of ways you can get started if you're interested in sort of deployment automation. We have a number of projects available through GitHub. The first one that's listed here, Citrix on GCP, will stand up a functioning Citrix environment, including the domain controllers, the cloud connectors, and a sample, VDA fleet. So it's a great way to get started if you want to just explore what Citrix on GCP looks like, or you want to explore the mechanism of using Deployment Manager and PowerShell Bootstrap scripts and things to automate what otherwise would have been a manual deployment. That's a great place to get started. And Citrix has also provided templates to launch the ADC gateways. Those were available, as I mentioned, on the Google Marketplace, but there are also Deployment Manager templates available that can automate the provisioning of those tools as well. So that's a great place to really start exploring one of the best practices in the cloud, which is don't build things by hand. When there's an automated option in place, deploy via scripts, via templates, and these projects will help you get started that way for Citrix workload on GCP.
Jeff, that's a really good segue to the next topic here and in discussing some of these real-world use cases, who's actually using this technology. Before we go on, though, I do want to remind everyone that we do love an interactive audience, and I'm seeing a bunch of questions coming into our Q&A. And please know that we are going to have some time here at the end to cover those. And if anybody else has a thought or a question or a comment, please do pop that into the Q&A. We are keeping an eye on it. We're trying to answer as many as we can here at the end. So yeah, definitely keep asking us those questions. So diving a little bit deeper, looking at best practices and anyone who wants to extend their Citrix ecosystem, into Google Cloud Platform, and maybe some people who have actually even done this. Rick, you and I have had a chance to work together over the years, and you're one of those people that's boots on the ground to get a chance to get their hands dirty. So I'm really curious about this, and I think this is the fun part. Can you share a few real-world customer stories where Citrix was deployed on GCP, and then maybe a little bit later we can cover some best practices?
I would be happy to, sir. So one of the first ones I'll touch on is a joint customer of ours from EMEA, the Neste Corporation. This is different for us in the States. This isn't Neste. This is actually a sustainable energy producing company. Now, these guys were not unlike a lot of our customers at Citrix who had been Citrix customers for a lot of years, had invested in and built up and managed their own data centers over the years, and finally got to a breaking point where performance was starting to degrade. They needed to make some new investments in infrastructure or a change in their strategy in order to get the performance and usability back up for the users. So in this case, what the customer did was adopted Citrix Cloud and the Citrix Workspace and Google Cloud Platform. And they moved some of their workloads initially up onto Google Cloud Platform. So it's kind of also really interesting about these guys. They're also a G Suite user. So in the process of making that shift, they also went from just delivering their virtualized applications through Citrix Workspace to also delivering their G Suite applications and services through Citrix Workspace. So they made this change, and it became really, really evident and obvious to them as they went through the pilot that this was going to provide them with dramatically improved performance and manageability. And that ultimately has proven out extremely well for them. Another customer solution that I'll touch on that may resonate a bit for folks who've been caught a little bit flat-footed, if you will, as most of us have by some of the recent events in our world. So this was another Citrix and Google customer, obviously. These guys had actually already deployed Citrix Cloud on GCP, and they were delivering one set of applications and services to one particular group of users initially. I believe that count was somewhere around 800 users. So they had deployed these users with Chromebooks. So they leveraged the Chromebooks and Chrome Enterprise to deploy a configuration on the Chromebook. So they just get them out of the box, fire them up, log in, and then Citrix Workspace is already there, already connected, and they're off to the races. So they've had this existing solution in place. They've been leveraging it, getting great value out of it. And then they got hit with this whole pandemic stuff. And these guys, this organization, I probably should have mentioned going in, they're a used car dealership. And they've got a really unique business model, but their business model relies upon having inventory, right? Being able to buy cars from people. And the people that handle that that buying are in the call center. Well, as soon as the pandemic stuff hit and everyone was forced to move home, they had 1,600 employees that had to not come into work the next day. So what these guys did, they had the rest of the infrastructure already in place. put in a rapid order for 1,600 new Chromebooks. Those Chromebooks showed up stat. They fired those things up, deployed a few additional VDAs up on GCP for the call center users. And in under a week, they went from, oh my gosh, what are we going to do to keep the lights on with our business here, to that call center being up and fully operational in under a week. And that's including the acquisition of devices. So that was a pretty compelling bit of value that they got out of our joint solution there.
Very cool. Jeff, anything to add?
I'd follow up with some discussion of some best practices that we've extracted from some of the engagements with customers like Rick was just telling us about. And, you know, I'll pick out a few of these bullets that resonate especially with me. Like the first one, make sure you have your cloud foundations in place on GCP. Now, when we refer to cloud foundations, we're talking about like the when you're first getting started as a GCP customer, your organization, you know, setting up your private connectivity between on-prem networks into the cloud, making sure that your identity systems and your Active Directory, you know, can communicate between these environments, making sure that basically you have a landing zone in the cloud to deploy workloads like Citrix. That's what we would call the cloud foundations. And this is something in general, if you don't have that in place and you want to bring a Citrix workload onto GCP, that's a great time to do it. And we have consulting services that can help you do that, help you build those cloud foundations to support Citrix workloads as well as other workloads that you might want to bring to the cloud. But that's a good thing to make sure that you have in place, because it really, if you think about that three-step approach I described, step one really was about private connectivity and Active Directory. So you want to make sure those foundations are in place. Also, the next to last bullet, the lead with hosted, shared, or server VDI delivery models. You know, lots of Citrix customers want a desktop experience, but it's interesting to point out that a desktop experience does not necessarily mean the desktop operating system like Windows 10. In many cases, it's far more cost-effective to host a Windows Server VM and have lots of user sessions hosted on that same virtual machine. By doing that, you can bring your infrastructure costs way down, and the users still experience a desktop experience very similar to what they would have if they were logging into a Windows 10 virtual machine remotely. And so you satisfy the end user's need for a desktop environment to get their job done, but you can do it very cost effectively with multi-session hosting. And the last, optimize costs from design to operation. You know, we have ways to size virtual machines. Is one of the powers of Google Cloud Platform is that you can choose custom sized virtual machines, choose just how much CPU, just how much memory you need. So right sizing your resources in the beginning, using Citrix power management features to you know, power down VMs when they're not being used, really embracing that elastic nature of the cloud, can help you host these Citrix workloads at a much lower price point than you would be able to do if you were investing in on-prem hardware. So those are some of the best practices that I think really resonate, and you should keep your minds on when you're planning a Citrix deployment on GCP.
Yeah, and if I could expand on that and touch on a couple of the other points. You know, one thing I definitely encourage people to do when they start to make their move to cloud, and you can't see the air quotes that I'm throwing up here, but the cloud has a ton of promise and can also be a little bit confusing to folks. But one thing is, when you start dealing with the cloud and cloud-based services, gives you an opportunity to really rethink a lot of the way you run IT and the way you run your infrastructure. So I would definitely encourage people as you start this journey to be ready to think differently about all aspects of your operation, from the types of services that you consume, the processes that you employ to manage and maintain things over time, how you monitor things, a transition like this really gives you an opportunity to optimize things at so many different layers and eliminate a lot of the constraints that we used to have to design around when we were building into fixed infrastructure inside of a data center that we would manage. So I'd suggest go into it being ready to think a little bit differently and to take some steps to take advantage of some of these new capabilities you get with cloud and cloud-delivered services. The other piece I'll mention is, as a best practice, it actually really boils down to requirement, and that's leveraging the virtual app and desktop service for your session brokering and administration. This really gets you the benefit of all the latest capabilities that Citrix technologies, all the evolution that has happened over time. And one very important feature capability that the virtual app and desktop service has that you can't get anywhere else is the auto-scaling service. Now, the auto-scaling service, kind of tying into Jeff's point about cost optimization from design to operation, the auto-scaling service really gives you a lot of power to be able to find that sweet spot, that intersection of performance. In other words, how much fleet you have powered on and available to service users at any point in time, and the costs associated with them. So you can leverage the auto-scaling service. It also, because we can evolve the service at the same pace that Google is evolving GCP, it also gives us the perfect platform to be able to support provisioning of resources up into Google Cloud also. And the last one, actually, I'm not going to touch too much on the one resource location per region. There are examples of where you might want to have multiple resource locations per region, but you generally have a mapping of one resource location per region per environment type, right? You may have two resource locations, one for test dev, one for production, for example. Anyway, I'd say those are in short order, those are kind of the high points of the best practices.
All right. Well, thank you, Rick. Definitely, people are taking screenshots of this one slide right now. Again, you are going to get access to both Rick and Jeff, so if you have any questions that we're not going to get to, by all means, do pop those in the Q&A. We'll get time for them later. Time for one last lightning round question. The best way for someone to get started on Citrix, with Citrix on GCP. Any final pieces of advice? Jeff, you first.
Yeah, well, I would say, like the slide says, just dig in, get started. So check out those open source projects, get some trials going, and definitely reach out if we can be of assistance. There's a couple of email addresses there at the bottom of the screen. Feel free to reach out and let us know how we can help you bring your Citrix workloads to GCP.
Yeah, and then I'll pack on top of that. We're actually in the process right now of running a private tech preview for a powerful new capability that allows the Citrix Workspace to leverage Google Cloud ID or your Google identity, G Suite identity, as the identity provider for Citrix Workspace. So that allows you to take advantage of all the capabilities and the power of Google Cloud ID and use that as your primary authentication point into the Citrix Workspace and all of the apps. So we've got that private tech preview going on right now. I know it's kind of a long URL there. In retrospect, perhaps we should have shortened it. But yeah, if you have any interest, hit that link up and register yourself, and we'll reach out and get you into it.
Thank you, Rick. Stick with us, everyone. I want to ask a couple of questions here from both Jeff and Rick, and I know that we've got a bunch of them coming in. Whoever wants to answer this first, I guess. How easily and cost-effectively can you run Windows 10 BDA on GCP?
Yeah, Bill, I'll take that. It's interesting, as we discussed that in many cases, Windows Server and multi-session can be a better option than Windows 10. But you can run Windows 10 workloads on GCP. There are some considerations that you need to keep in mind because of Microsoft licensing requirements that require the desktop client OS to run on dedicated hardware. We have sole tenant nodes for that purpose. So you can configure groups of sole tenant nodes that are dedicated to your organization, and those nodes with the appropriate Microsoft license add-ons can be used to host desktop operating system. And there are some efficiencies there that you can get on sole tenant nodes with CPU overcommit and the ability to pack more virtual machines, onto those sole tenant nodes that provide you some economies when you're looking at that kind of sole tenant deployment. So that would be my advice if you're exploring Windows 10 for Citrix workload, is consider the sole tenant nodes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, or consider leveraging server VDI as well. So that's a use case that some people will pass over or not think about, but you can actually leverage the server operating system to service those use cases where you need to have one user per VDA instance, right? So cases, for example, say like a developer use case, or a type of a use case where you've got users needing to have the ability to install their own applications, those kinds of things. A server VDI solution gives the user that Windows desktop look and feel, runs 99.9% of the Windows applications out there, just like you can on top of Windows 10. And services it without the additional cost and complexity.
Very cool. Last question, you guys. Thanks for everyone sticking around. I really do appreciate it. I do think this one is important, so I cannot end it. How is disaster recovery handled within either cloud platform? In other words, what happens if you lose or lost the complete operating environment in one or the other? Definitely curious about that one.
Oh. That's a challenging one, because a disaster could be a failure of a component at any different layer, right? But if you look at the architecture of the solutions that we had laid out earlier, I'm going to do a quick pushback to this initial slide here. For resources, if you look at all the Citrix cloud-based services and all the services, native services that Google Cloud Platform provides, high availability is built into the design of those services. So you essentially get high availability by default there. Then in cases where you've got resources that are not highly available natively, like Active Directory, for example, to get highly available AD, you need to have multiple ADDCs. So, we leverage a combination of splitting of those machines across zones. We also leverage a combination of the same kind of a combination for the cloud connectors, which are designed to scale horizontally. So it really depends on where you're trying to accommodate or avoid a failure. If you're trying to be able to survive a scenario where internet connectivity is lost, which is obviously when you're running a workload up inside of a cloud on a network as powerful and sophisticated as Google's, that's not really likely to happen. But in the case that does happen, you can architect like this hybrid design pattern that I've thrown back up onto the screen, where you leverage storefront for the UI mechanism. The cloud connectors will they have the ability to go into a localhost cache mode if they're unable to communicate to Citrix Cloud for some reason. And that combination then provides resiliency and continuity until your internet connectivity pops back up. So what happens and how is it handled really depends on what type of failure you're looking at and whether or not you've designed the system to be able to accommodate and continue on the case of a failure like that.
And I would say
Sounds like
from
a
a GCP perspective, it absolutely is. So in this kind of advanced architecture, I would definitely recommend working with your Citrix team, working with your GCP team to engage the right architects to help design the solution. But ultimately in GCP, you know, DR many times relies on alternate regions. So making sure your private networking is in another region, an alternate region, Active Directory exists there as well, and you have the ability to do a Citrix Fleet launch with cloud connectors mapped to different resource locations. So having that sort of alternate region approach to DR and then using Citrix features to sort of direct traffic to one resource location or the other.
Perfect. Jeff, thank you so much for that. I know we have a whole bunch of questions, but unfortunately we are out of time. We ran over a little bit, and thank you for everyone for sticking around. Magali, let me pass it back to you to wrap us up.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I wanted to thank everybody. Before we go, we would like to thank Citrix and Google Cloud for sponsoring today's event, as well as Bill, Rick, and Jeff for the informative discussion. Just a quick reminder, the seminar will be available on demand starting tomorrow, so please feel free to come back and review. Have a great day, and thank you so much for attending.